Hi guys, and welcome to another review episode. In today's video, we are going to be looking at a video from a Dr. Ford Bremer that popped up on my YouTube channel. How I cleaned out my arteries in 1 year. So in the interest of transparency, I have just watched this video and yeah, some interesting points to take away. It is a little bit slow, so you'll have to bear with me. We'll have to bear with Dr. Ford. He could perhaps speak a little bit faster, but we'll watch the video and I'll give my commentary and give my thoughts. First off, though, how I cleaned out my arteries in 1 year. The title is okay. It's slightly misleading. He talks about a CIMT score, a carotid intima media thickness score, which doesn't actually measure plaques. And he keeps talking about plaque and plaque reversal, but a CIMT doesn't technically measure plaque. It gives you a risk score, which is likely to represent plaque, but doesn't actually directly measure plaque. So anyway, let's watch the video, see what he has to say. Maybe we can learn a thing or two.
I reversed 20 years of arterial plaque.
Pretty bold statement to make. 20 years of arterial plaque. Can see why I got 1.5 million views.
For years, I was eating the wrong diet. When I actually got tested, I was emotionally annihilated.
Emotionally annihilated. Right. Okay. I mean, it can be very disjointing. That's maybe not the best word for it. Disrupting as a doctor, you know, to be told, actually, you're the one that's not healthy. This is quite challenging and confronting to doctors. I'm not sure I'd go as far as saying emotionally annihilating, but I suppose it makes for good YouTube. Anyway, let's carry on. It's a good intro so far. It's very catching.
Despite my efforts, I still developed cardiovascular plaque. I truly believe that what I did can be done by many people.
Yeah, basically everyone can do exactly what he did. He didn't do anything special. I'm going to spoil it a little bit, but he didn't do anything special. Interestingly, though, yeah, he's talking about plaque. Now, he actually never measured his plaque. According to the video, he did a CIMT score, which is slightly different. Yes, it's a good indication of plaque, but it's not the same as measuring plaque directly.
Everyone can reverse plaque, but almost everybody can stabilize it and decrease your risk of a heart attack.
Yeah, that is very, very true. I mean, lots of people come to me, especially carnivore patients. They want CT calcium scores. They want to see it going down. They basically get promised by all these online influencers that it's going to go down. And then almost inevitably, it doesn't. People like Judy Cho, Dr. Anthony Chaffee, you know, these people talk about all these thousands of patients that they've seen where they've, you know, reduced their cardiac plaque, reduced their carotid plaque, etc. Hundreds of thousands of patients. I've seen it once on one patient, and I've been doing this kind of work. I've been doing low carb now for about 4 or 5 years. I've been doing kind of mostly predominantly carnivore, heavy keto, you know, kind of integrative GP now. This real kind of work for about 2.5 years now. I've seen it once. One patient, their cardiac score, their CT calcium score went down on one patient. It just doesn't happen very often. But I think everybody pretty much out there can stabilize it and can likely very much slow the progression and probably reverse it if they really actually put the time and effort into it to do it properly. And what Dr. Ford's video is going to show us is it doesn't actually necessarily take that much effort.
The vast majority of that risk right off the table. This is what I did. This is my story of how I reversed my arterial plaque.
Again, he's not actually measured his plaque. CIMT is not measuring plaque, but it is a good indication.
This video is about how I found plaque in my own arteries.
Except you didn't. You've had a CIMT score, which suggests you have a high burden of plaque. It doesn't actually directly measure plaque.
I did to reverse it. I hope my story can help you identify whether you have plaque and what you can do to minimize it.
Yep, good idea.
I'll cover the dietary, lifestyle, supplements, and medication changes I did after I found out that I had plaque.
I think, yeah, we'll see what he has to say, of course. I already know what he says because I've already seen this video once out of just transparency. Like always, I review it once, make sure I've got all my, can bring up any relevant studies or anything like that to show you guys. In this case, there isn't really any relevant studies to talk about. I think just so as a default, supplements, if you're having to take supplements, by definition, your diet's probably not complete. Though some supplements can still be useful. I am a fan of boron as a supplement. Most people do not get enough boron in their diet. Fruit is really our main source of boron. Not really that relevant for this video, though I will talk about it a little bit later on. So bear boron in mind. It will become important later on. Boron is very hard to get in our diet, especially if you are following a keto and especially a carnivore diet. Boron is almost non-existent on a carnivore diet. So actually really important to think about boron supplementation. I've actually just ordered some more boron. I don't regularly take it because I eat some fruit in my diet. Apples, fair bit. They do contain quite a bit of boron, but I do occasionally have it if I find myself getting some muscle cramps. It really does help with magnesium, kind of holding magnesium in the body. But we'll come back to all of this later on.
You'll see both my actual CIMT studies showing the presence and then the reversal of plaque.
But it doesn't. Sorry to be pedantic, but this is important. A CIMT does not show plaque. It suggests plaque, and it's a good suggestion, but it doesn't directly measure plaque.
My arteries. Stay until the end, and I'll show you how my latest numbers turned out. We'll also show medical lab tests demonstrating the exact cause of the problem, and then blood tests that show what reversed that plaque. Spoiler alert, I'm like most of us. Aging took a toll on my insulin receptors. Remember, growing old is just not for sissies.
It's not for sissies, apparently. Okay, fair enough. As I am about to turn 40, it's my birthday next week. I'll remember that aging is not for sissies. Look, aging and insulin resistance are major risk factors in plaque, kind of formation. As we get older, just more and more damage starts to accrue. There are studies, autopsies in, unfortunately, people from the age of 18 in things like Vietnam, where they were finding carotid, plaques, basically coronary plaques, developing in 18-year-olds. Now, obviously, smoking and things was a lot more common back then as well. This is a major risk factor. We know this. But this isn't something that just happens, when you turn 70, 80. It can be happening from an early age. The point is, though, that usually it's a very slow process and can potentially be stabilized and stopped if you kind of know what you're doing and you're actually aware of what is going on. But this is really just to say that, yes, aging is a big factor, but it's not like it just happens the moment you turn 40, hopefully not, 50, 60, 70. There's no one magical age where it just starts to happen. These are things that everybody, really from any age, should actually be thinking about, potentially even children, though ketogenic diets and so on are a little bit controversial, of course, in children, though they have been used to very good effect to treat things like epilepsy, type 1, type 2 diabetes, etc. Can still get type 2 as a child. It's uncommon, but it can happen.
At the end of the video, I'll share a confession with you. It's about an unpopular choice I've made to manage my plaque, and I've already caught a lot of grief.
It's not that controversial, but we'll come to it. I won't spoil it.
Here's what happened. At age 57, I thought I was healthy.
Yep, common. A lot of people think they're very healthy. They get some tests, find out they're not. Unfortunately, it happens more often than I care to think. This is why I'm a big advocate for testing. And I disagree strongly disagree with this notion that some, particularly carnivore influencers, doctors, are pushing that you never need to get blood tests. Don't worry about it. Don't bother getting scans. Everything's all fine. As long as you eat meat, as long as you feel fine, everything's fine. Don't worry about it. It's all good. It's all cozy. It's all rosy. It's just bullshit. It's not. You have to get tests. You have to be abreast of the situation. You have to know what is going on with you. Otherwise, you are potentially just leaving yourself problems, just kicking the can down the road. And before you know it, it might be too late to actually address those issues.
I've been a prevention doc for over 40 years, about 4 decades. I ran the preventive medicine program at Johns Hopkins.
But isn't that sad? He couldn't actually prevent his own arterial plaque because he just didn't know actually really what he was doing, and he admits it in this video. That's not a disparaging comment for Dr. Ford Bremer. He just was following bad advice, like a lot of the doctors that we know, like myself, for many years, following just bad advice because this is what we thought was true.
I taught the doctors at Johns Hopkins, and that's arguably the #1 preventive medicine program in the world. As far as prevention was concerned, I also practiced what I preached.
Yeah, which is good. A lot of doctors don't. But he was following his own advice, is what he's saying. And yet he still had these problems.
And that was all about lifestyle and no medications.
Which is not wrong. He just had the advice wrong.
Low-fat dietary guidelines were the standard at that point in time.
Yep, which they've been for a long time, which is just total garbage, basically. Excellent book. Nina Teichholz's The Big Fat Surprise. I've got it here right in front of me. Everyone should read this book. I'll put a link, actually. You guys can find it on my Amazon store anyway, but I'll put a link in the episode description. It's a fantastic book. Everybody should read this. And Nina Teichholz actually has a PhD now because of the work that she's done all about this kind of stuff. So really fascinating stuff. Really good read. Big Fat Surprise.
Questioned it. At that time, we were just discovering that cholesterol in the diet might not be the cause of cholesterol in the artery walls.
That's very true. So things like the American Heart Association have long since now taken saturated fat out of the US dietary guidelines. Australia, United Kingdom, the UK, other countries across the world, they are lagging behind. They still haven't taken it out. The recommendation to limit saturated fat and cholesterol in the diet, they still recommend reducing that down. But the American Heart Association for a long time now, I think about 5-6 years, has taken that out. Of course, they didn't really tell anyone when they took it out. They just kind of slyly, quietly took it out of the guidelines and didn't tell anyone. Yet, this is one of probably the most major changes in US dietary guidelines for an extremely long time when it comes to cardiovascular disease. And yet they didn't tell anyone. Interesting that, isn't it? Possibly, is it because they're in the pocket of the drug companies who want to keep pushing cholesterol as the cause of heart disease? I don't know. Question, not an answer.
So as that concept turned around, it was turning towards calories. Since fat was the most calorie dense, fat must be the biggest problem. That was the logic anyway.
Yeah, which is totally wrong, of course, total bullshit, but we'll let him carry on.
I believed it at that time, and for decades. Not anymore. But that's a different story for later. Back to those previous decades of my lifestyle. I overachieved in the cardio exercise space. I ran half marathons, sometimes more than every week.
Okay, that's a little bit ridiculous. That's a little bit excessive. But also goes to show, exercise, whilst incredibly important, can't save you from cardiovascular disease. Because whilst he didn't directly measure his plaque, he did a CAMT score, which is a really good indicator of plaque, and it was elevated. Yet he was exercising half marathons almost every week, if not more, he's saying, and yet he still had cardiovascular disease. So what's going on?
I ran a dozen full marathons by age 55. I was not only against medication, but also against supplements. To me,
Yeah, much like me. And yeah, to me, most supplements are just expensive urine. That is very true.
supplements at that point were just expensive urine. But something happened at age 54. I should have paid a lot more attention. During a routine screening, I noticed my blood pressure was 130/90.
It's not terrible, but it's a little bit elevated. It's not perfect. Really, it should be more like 110/70 would be better. And of course, the traditional teaching, the conventional teachings, it goes up with age. But, I've come to realize a lot of things that certainly conventional teaching may not necessarily be true. And things which are quote unquote age related as well may not actually strictly be age related. It's just things happen as we age very, very commonly. Of interest, if anyone cares, my average blood pressure at the moment is around about 102/61, which is actually incredibly good. Now, I am younger than Dr. Ford Bremer. I don't know how old he is, but he was saying he ran John Hopkins for about 40 odd years. So let's assume that he did that maybe age 25, something like that onwards, perhaps. He's 65 probably at least. I'm just about to turn 40. So yes, look, there's a difference there. But I think he was saying he was about 55, possibly at this age. We're not exactly sure, but blood pressure is a very good independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease. And generally speaking, lower is better unless you are symptomatic. So mine is about 102/61 on the whole, on average, without any blood pressure medications, without anything. And if you guys are interested, you can see what I do with my diet and so on over on my main channel, The Meat Medic. You can check that out as well, of course, or check on the website.
And it didn't come back down. I didn't like it, but I finally agreed to take medication to lower my blood pressure.
Interesting. I mean, 130/90, yes, look, it's a little bit borderline, but it's not actually that high. I'm not sure I would have rushed to have started medications for somebody at that blood pressure, but I suppose if you're being very aggressive, yes, fine. But of course, I would have liked to have tried diet lifestyle interventions first. Of course, 99% of doctors, including himself at this point, would have been saying, well, you're doing everything right. So your blood pressure must just need medication because it's treatment resistant or something. There must be something else that's going on. So you must just need tablets. But actually, he was actually just following the wrong advice.
I retired yet again. I've retired a few times.
I guess he's probably a little bit older than 40, unless he was doing very well for himself. But I wish I could retire at 40. Maybe.
Looking for something to do. A mutual friend introduced me to Brad Bale and Amy Duneen. Brad and Amy teach their own form of preventive medicine. I read their book, Beat the Heart Attack Gene, which opened the door to two other perspectives for me. First, it made me question the standard model of disease focused on LDL cholesterol, or
of course, that's the diet heart hypothesis proposed by Ansel Keys and his team in 20s and onwards, I think it was. And basically total bullshit, really. LDL cholesterol has never been shown to cause heart disease. Total cholesterol has never been shown to cause heart disease. There's absolutely zero studies ever demonstrating that cholesterol has caused heart disease. Now, it is associated. There is no doubt. There is an association. Anyone that says there isn't does not, frankly, know what they are talking about. But the association is weak at best and isn't always necessarily there, depending on your age group and other risk factors and so on as well. So there is an association, but it's not the best association. Let's carry on.
Bad cholesterol. Like most dogs, of course, I knew that diabetes caused heart disease, but I had no clue just how common prediabetes is.
Insanely common is the answer. In terms of how risky diabetes is, it's about 10 times risk increase if you have diabetes of getting heart disease and a heart attack. That is pretty damn serious. 1,000% if you want to be a bit more dramatic about it. But yeah, about 10 times. And prediabetes does increase those risks. I prefer the term prediabetes to borderline diabetes. A lot of people call it borderline diabetes. I really dislike that term because it suggests that it's not as important. It suggests that it's not actually that important. It suggests it's not diabetes yet, and so on, which technically it isn't, but it still is a big risk factor. I also slightly dislike the term pre-diabetes. I actually refer to it as early diabetes now because that's actually, I think, more accurate and more, it conveys the message more to my patients that this is actually something really serious, and this is something that we should be taking very seriously and actually actively really doing something about to try and get rid of this pre or early diabetes, because it's a big risk factor in and of itself. And otherwise people just tend to not take it seriously. In my experience, no matter what you say to them, if you just say like pre-diabetes or borderline diabetes, if you say it's early diabetes, they just take it more seriously, which is really important.
And also, like most docs, I didn't know how to diagnose it. And
I think most doctors probably know how to diagnose pre-diabetes or early diabetes. Fairly straightforward. I mean, I'm not sure off the top of my head the American units, because I work in Australia, and the UK prior to that, which uses the same units. But an HbA1c of 6.0 is technically, pretty much diagnostic for pre-diabetes. But there's other things that you can look at, of course, OGTTs as well. I don't tend to do those very much nowadays. HbA1c is just so much easier. Fasting glucoses, of course, and then things like fasting insulin and so on. It can give you a picture, but one of the most easy ways to diagnose it is just an HbA1c. Very, very simple. Unless you've got a known blood disorder, HbA1c is going to pretty much give you the answer.
Docs, I really had no clue that metabolic disease causes most chronic diseases.
I think most doctors probably don't know that. That's right. I think Dr. Ford here is right. Probably most doctors do not know that metabolic disease is a major leading risk factor for pretty much all causes of diseases, but specifically and particularly heart disease. I'm not sure about aging. I mean, chronological aging, no, because that just ticks down, but biological aging, perhaps. But certainly things like cerebrovascular disease, dementia, type 2 diabetes, of course, type 3 diabetes. We refer to Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes now. Cancers, everything. That basically metabolic disease is a massive risk factor for all of these things. Which is why over the years, everybody said that obesity is one of the biggest risk factors for everything, because obesity really is hand in hand linked with metabolic disorder.
Even most of what many of us call normal aging. The second
is that a quote unquote
perspective I got from reading Brad and Amy's book was test, don't guess.
Yeah, and this is where I have a real issue, as said already, with some of the carnivore, specifically doctors who are telling people not to bother getting testing, or, I don't care about this testing or that testing, and things that are major risk factors for cardiovascular disease, like small dense LDL. I really take umbrage to that.
Coming from Hopkins, I'd always been focused more on William Osler's advice on history, listening to the patient. Getting focused on Brad and Amy and thinking about test, don't guess gave me a whole different perspective.
And that's right. I mean, you obviously ask the patients, how are you feeling? What symptoms do you have? And all these other bits and pieces. But this idea that you just know your body and you just know, quote unquote, know when you're unwell, it's just bullshit. It's not true. It's not accurate. It's not reliable in any real sense of the word. Now, some people, yes, they kind of know when they don't feel well, and they might come in saying, I don't feel well, I'm tired, or whatever like that. That's fine. That's slightly different. But just saying, well, I know I haven't got diabetes. I know I haven't got cardiovascular disease. Bullshit. You don't know. You don't know unless you get tested, unless it's really bad. And then but it's probably too late. Well, it's never too late. Just it's late stage then. Harder to treat.
Realize that patients listen to lab tests.
Oh, yeah, they do. People like the numbers. Don't know why I'm doing that for money. People like the numbers, especially men. I have definitely found that with my practice. Women tend to just be able to accept that kind of what you tell them. They can rationalize it better. They can kind of imagine it. They just seem to be a lot better at that than men. Men seem to be a bit more of the doubting Thomas. They need those numbers. They need to see it with their own eyes. And this is why I do a lot of testing, especially for men, because I want to show them, no, this is what is going on. These are your numbers. This is what you need to do. This is a problem. That's a problem. That's okay. Whatever it is. People like those results. I think they need those results.
They won't often listen to their doctor.
Yeah, that's basically quite true. The women are a little bit better than men. Men, listen, pay attention.
So Brad and Amy invited me to their next event. They were training doctors in Las Vegas. I joined them there. Some vendors were providing a free screening test called CIMT. It was a quick test, literally less than 5 minutes. Safe. There is no radiation.
Yep, it's an ultrasound. So it stands for carotid intermedia thickness test, or SCORE.
Inexpensive. The routine price was between $200 and $300.
Which, look, I'm not sure I would call that inexpensive. US dollars, I mean, that's what, like $400-500 Australian dollars. That is a little bit steep. Like I work in quite a deprived area where there's a huge burden of obesity, metabolic disease, metabolic dysfunction, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. Enormous burden. I work in one of the poorest areas, perhaps at least in this region where I live. And a lot of people, they're not going to be able to afford $500. Thankfully, here in Australia, this kind of testing, actually carotid artery Doppler, you can get it for about $100 out of pocket, which is a lot cheaper than 400-500, equivalent Australian dollars to US.
That test, again, is called the CIMT. It stands for Carotid Intima Media Thickness Test. It's an ultrasound of your neck with a special measurement technology component. It's used to measure plaque instead of what most tests, like the stress tests, do, measuring blood flow.
It doesn't actually measure plaque. It gives you a risk score, which can give you a very good indication of plaque. It doesn't actually really show you exactly how much plaque you have. So that's an important point to differentiate. It really is a bugbear of mine. People should actually be specific when they're talking about these kinds of things. But he is right that it's most likely better that showing plaque than something like a stress echo, which is looking at blood flow. So if you're not sure what stress echoes are, fairly straightforward. They give you either make you run on a treadmill or something, or more often than not, they just give you an injection, galadium, something like that. I think it's called gadolinium. I can't remember which way it is now. Which some people don't want because it's like a contrast type of thing. But basically, they give you an injection to kind of speed up your heart and so on, and then they can do the echo to look at whether there's actually any inducible ischemia. So that's basically cardiovascular disease. The problem with that is it only shows you if you're symptomatic for the most part. Now, you can have quite a significant blockage and have a completely normal stress echo. So you could probably have 60 or 70% blockage, possibly more, and have a normal stress echo. So it's only really useful for people who have really bad cardiovascular disease. Everyone else is pretty much going to come up completely normal. So I am not a huge fan of stress echoes. I much prefer things like carotid Dopplers and CT calcium scores, which we'll come back to the video, of course.
So why looking at the neck, the carotid, instead of the heart? Plaque formation is due to metabolic issues, metabolism. Metabolism's the same all over your body. So if you have plaque in one artery bed, you have it in all the others.
Most likely. Yeah. So things like peripheral vascular disease, people think it's a separate condition to cardiovascular disease. It's really not. Cerebrovascular disease, in the brain, people treat it as different to cardiovascular disease. It's really not different. It's pretty much the same thing. And again, so if you do measure the plaque in the arteries, or at least get a good measure of the plaque in the arteries with a CIMT score, for example, it gives you a very good indication as to what's actually happening in and around the coronary arteries as well.
But here's the key. CIMT doesn't focus on blood flow. It focuses on plaque, and more importantly, the type of plaque. Again, that's why cardiac stress tests, which measure blood flow, do not predict heart attacks. Back to the story.
I mean, they can, but just not fantastically, as I've already pointed out.
So I took the CIMT test, expecting to see no plaque. I was wrong. Look at this chart. This was 2015, and you can see my name and two pictures, my right and left carotid arteries. What really impacted me here was the number next to it, 1.209 millimeters on the right side and 1.215 millimeters on the left side. Now, what does that mean? This is an artery, and it has many layers. Let's focus on two of these layers. The one in the middle is called the media. It's made mostly of muscle. It allows the artery to expand like one of those expanding garden hoses. Then
here's a good analogy. So the CIMT measures the carotid intima media thickness. So both of the intima and the media layer. It doesn't actually directly measure plaque, though. I think, again, he should be a little bit more specific with this, ideally. But yeah, fine, fair enough.
The inner layer of the artery wall, the intima, it deals with the essential metabolic functions of the vessel, like dropping off oxygen and picking up cellular waste materials. Guess where plaque builds up? No, not on the inside, but between those two layers, the intima and the media. That's why they call this test the carotid intima media thickness test.
Surprise, surprise.
The ideal thickness is 1 millimeter or less. Any time you go over that, it's considered a significant plaque.
And anything, less than 0.6 is ideal, basically indicating very much likely zero plaque. Below 1 millimeter, there could still be plaque, just not likely clinically significant.
Some more conservative researchers don't count plaque until it reaches 1.3 millimeter thickness. Now, it took me time to realize that despite all of my healthy habits, I had still developed cardiovascular plaque. That was a gut punch. At first, I felt like all that work
Was he emotionally annihilated again? Great term. I might have to use that one.
that discipline to stay healthy was wasted. I felt like maybe I should have just let myself go, eat all I wanted, lie on the couch, watch TV, be lazy, eat nachos, etc., etc., etc.
Sounds good. Of course, you can then just go and get a stent, go on statins, probably survive, probably be okay. That's what a lot of people do. But no, I don't think he wasted all that time because he kept himself otherwise pretty healthy. And had he had a heart attack, he would have been much more likely to have survived as well. And likely he would have had a heart attack much later on in life as well.
It took me weeks to emotionally wrap my head around the other side. If I still had plaque with my focus on prevention, what shape would I have been in if I had not taken care of my body?
Which is what 99% of people do, is they just abuse their body, don't take care of it, don't do any preventative work, and then they get surprised when they have a heart attack.
It slowly dawned on me that I could already have had a heart attack. I could even already be dead. It doesn't take much plaque to cause a heart attack. Now,
Depending on the type of plaque, if it's hard plaque and it's just building up, it will take a lot of plaque. If it's soft plaque and a chunk breaks off, no, you can have a heart attack quite easily. Scary.
another thing that changed my life. Right here, you can see, even though my average IMT was below 1 millimeter, I still had more plaque than the average 57-year-old.
So let's put it in context. He's saying that a clinically significant plaque is 1 millimeter or greater. His was 0.884. So the title of, how I cleaned out my arteries in 1 year, slightly clickbaity, but look, I think we can forgive him, for it. I think it's an important topic that he is discussing here, but he didn't actually have clinically significant, carotid stenosis or plaque formation here, according to his CIMT score.
Actually had the arteries of a 73-year-old. And that's when I started to think, I've got to change something.
So as we see here, it says a CIMT of less than 0.6 millimeters is generally considered healthy. That's where there's considered to generally just be no plaque at all. But again, it's not actually measuring the plaque.
Or I could die. I lived in Lexington, Kentucky at the time. Each Saturday morning, I ran my half marathon through some of the most beautiful horse country in the world. I remember starting the Saturday morning after discovering my plaque.
Should have watched this on 1.5 rather speed, or maybe 2 times. It's a bit slow. He needs to get to the point a little bit. Appreciate I'm slowing it down even more.
It occurred to me that if I had a heart attack out there in those horse farms, it would be hours before my body was found.
And he probably would have died because out of hospital cardiac arrests in the middle of nowhere, your chances of survival are slim to none, most likely.
And lifeless. Pardon the drama, but those fears are normal for someone that's first recognized their mortality, and often from finding the first time your own cardiovascular risk. Then I finally composed myself and realized I'm a professional in this space. I know more about it than most, and I needed to listen to my own medicine.
But But he was listening to his own medicine, but he still had this problem. Guess we'll hear what he did, what he changed.
Exercise like jogging doesn't cause heart attacks. And I needed to move on. So that's what.
I mean, it's unlikely. Just light exercise is unlikely to give you a heart attack. Severe exercise, strenuous exercise, it could do if you're very narrowed already. It's possible that jogging is unlikely to give you a heart attack.
When I returned home from that run, I decided to make a few changes. I did a few more tests. I did multiple tests, but the most important was an oral glucose tolerance test. These next 3 sentences are the 3 most important sentences in this video. If you hear nothing else, at least hear this. My blood sugar peaked over 160. That meant I had enough prediabetes to cause cardiovascular plaque.
Not quite sure entirely what he means by that. Enough prediabetes. I mean, prediabetes is prediabetes. You don't get more or less prediabetes. Other than your HbA1c, or in this case, oral glucose tolerance test is going to be higher, indicating that you are more likely to be closer to diabetes. Again, that's not necessarily going to cause plaque. It's never been shown to cause plaque, though it is an extremely strong association, of course. But this is a slightly odd slide. I'm not quite sure entirely what he's really referring to here, other than just, higher blood sugar level, higher risk of plaque.
Let me repeat, my blood sugars peaked at greater than 160, indicating enough prediabetes to cause plaque and heart disease risk.
Yeah, risk, but yeah.
You remember those changes I committed to make? One of them was, and the biggest one was, I switched from a low-fat diet to a low-carb diet. My biggest change out of all of them was switching from a low-fat diet to a low-carb diet.
Which we know works. There's a ton of evidence that low carbohydrate diets are very strongly beneficial for people. High carbohydrate diets are generally very problematic. Even if we just think logically, I mean, if you were out in the wild, like how would you even get that much access to carbohydrates? There might be a little bit of fruit and things around. Okay, if you just go and raid a strawberry field, fine. But like properly out in the wild, there's not that much fruit around. There's certainly not that many vegetables around. And unless you're great at smoking out bees and so on, you might not get any honey, but also what's the chance you're even going to come across a beehive really out in the wild? I'm not saying we should have zero carbohydrates. I myself do a mostly ketogenic low carb diet. I don't do carnivore strictly anymore, though I did for a year or so. But I also don't believe in high carbohydrate diets. There's government advice that we eat, typically up to about 65% of calories from carbohydrates. For me, I'm eating around 3,000 calories at the moment because I'm working out heavily and trying to build muscle. That is the equivalent of like almost 650 grams of carbohydrates, something like that a day. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely insane. It is way over the top. And it's just absolutely insane.
And today, I've tested multiple diets ranging from carnivore to vegan to paleo, ketovore, and everything in between.
A little bit of a difference, carnivore and vegan. I wonder which one he preferred. I know which one I preferred. I did vegan for one meal. It was disgusting. Never again.
But all were on the low carb side.
I mean, vegan isn't strictly low carb. Paleo isn't even strictly low carb either. Of course, carnivore, ketovore, definitely low carb diets. Because I guess you could make them low carb. You could do low carb vegan. You could do low carb paleo. Not that easy, but depends what you also mean by low carb. So low carb in research can be anything up to about 25% of calories from carbohydrates, which is still actually relatively on the high side. For me, that would probably be the equivalent of, well, let's work it out. So 3,000 calories, 25%, that's a quarter. That's 850 something, sorry, 750 calories. 750 calories divided by 4 calories per gram of carbohydrates. What's that? Just under 200, 175 roughly, I think off the top of my head, grams of carbohydrates. That's still a pretty reasonably high carb in my opinion. Typically low carb, I would say, is less than 100 grams.
Now, I'm doing even keto. I'm ketotic about 5 days a week. I've been fat adapted for about 10 years.
Interesting, because that's also what I recommend to people being keto about 5 out of 7 days of the week, roughly. Interesting. And I haven't watched this video prior to that advice. So that aligns with what I tell my patients as well. And I think there's very good logical reason for that. But you'll note that he's not in ketosis every single day, just most days of the week.
These days, I blow acetone in the range of between 5 and 20 parts per million, again, 5 days a week. So if you didn't get that, let me say it differently. I'm ketotic most days. I'm burning fat.
You can burn fat without being ketotic. Just going to put that out there. Otherwise, nobody could ever lose weight unless they weren't doing keto. You can.
No matter which diet I'm on. I just don't eat enough carbs to change that part of my diet. No.
Okay, well, it would change if you did eat the carbs. So I'm not sure it's okay to say whatever diet you do, you're going to be in ketosis. That's pretty much about the equivalent of what I eat. I'm actually about 20 to maybe 60 grams a day, 5 days a week. On the weekends, I tend to bump it up a little bit, about 100, maybe 150 grams of carbs. I think there's good reason for that. I think there's a lot of logical reason for that. And I find that works incredibly well for me and my patients. But you can do what you guys want to do, of course. There's no problem with that. I think just getting some baseline level of carbohydrates is often very, very useful.
Which diet I try, vegan or carnivore. I think
it'd be very hard to eat that little carbohydrates as a vegan, especially as a clean vegan. Very, very hard.
Avoid processed carbs and grain products. Let me show you the progress.
Yeah, they're pretty killer, actually. Bread recently put me in the hospital on my daughter's birthday party. Yeah. That's the story for another time. If you guys want to check out that story, it'll be on my main channel at The Meat Medic pretty soon. You guys should check that one out.
This is the biggest progress I've ever made. In about 1 year, I was able to reduce my average CIMT from 0.88 to 0.67 millimeters.
Which is a big change. So 0.6 below that is generally considered extremely unlikely to have any plaque. 1.0 is considered to have clinically significant levels of plaque. So just gives you an idea of where he's at.
1 year reduced my average CIMT, intima media thickness, from 0.88 to 0.67 millimeters. Now, let me explain what that means. If you look at the image right here, it means that I was able to reverse my arterial age from 73 to 52 years.
Pretty damn good. And actually, his arterial age is actually below his actual biological age or chronological age, which is very interesting.
1 year, I was able to reverse about 20 years of worth of arterial plaque deposition.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Yes, fine.
Now,
we'll give him some artistic license.
How did this happen? Let's go back and talk about what does, quote, plaque reversal actually mean? When you reverse plaque, you're not necessarily taking calcium out of the artery. It doesn't even mean taking cholesterol out of the artery necessarily. Here's what you're doing. What you are doing is taking the inflammatory liquid, the swelling and pus, out of the plaque.
Okay, well, it's not pus, because pus is bacteria and neutrophils and immune cells and so on. I mean, there is immune cells there, yes, but it's not technically pus.
It's like you're deflating a balloon or a tire. It will decrease the size of the plaque and the size of the intima media thickness.
Yeah, but the calcification won't necessarily go down, hence why it's often difficult to reverse calcium scores.
Loss of inflammation makes plaque shrink. Calcium deposits are just biomarkers. They're biomarkers of decreasing inflammation. But not everything is sunshine and rainbows. I still had plaque.
Yep, it was above 0.6.
Get another CIMT from 2019. You can read the description of the CIMT in different areas of the carotid artery here in the comments. My right carotid bulb says 1.3, again in millimeters, and the letter H H stands for heterogeneous. Heterogeneous, this sounds geeky, but hang in there for a minute. It's essential. You'll see why. You've seen.
So yeah, anyway, he explains later in the video, so I won't do it there. But what he's saying basically here is he still has plaque in 2019. So this is what, a couple of years after that original one, I think it was. So he's still got some plaque there.
Heterogeneous. Heterogeneous means mixed, just like homogeneous means consistent. Heterogeneous plaque is a mixture of soft and calcified plaque. How calcified? Well, it's actually mostly calcified, as you can see in the white in the image right here. Soft, hardened, and mixed plaque is classified by the amount of calcium embedded in that plaque. New plaque is homogeneous, soft, and deadly.
Yeah, because basically if it breaks off, it can then cause problems. It can block arteries and, all sorts.
It can squeeze into the bloodstream, where the inflammatory goo causes clots. The clots cause the problem, not the plaque itself. The inflammatory liquid is basically pus.
It's not actually pus, though. It's similar, but it's not pus. Again, pedantic, but I think important.
Plaques have a very thin cap near the intima. It doesn't even have to be big, just soft. As the body heals the plaque, it calcifies. This is an example of heterogeneous, partially calcified plaque. You can see it has some calcium, which is good. Calcium in this case helps with the healing and scarring process. It's a biomarker of plaque stability.
Yeah, it's basically calcium is kind of like stabilizing the plaque. Almost think about it like putting a mesh over the top. So essentially this kind of, basically pimple here essentially can't pop and burst and rupture and then, cause thrombosis and then cause blockage, and so on.
Now, here, this is not the healthiest calcification. Calcium is all over the place. It's not organized, and it's surrounded by a lot of hot liquid, like islands of hot liquid and calcium. This plaque can still rupture if the cap is thin. This is calcified plaque. The calcium is well organized, and it has a thick cap.
Yeah, so it's much more stable. It's much more protected. That kind of mesh almost over the top is less likely for that kind of pimple, so to speak, to burst, rupture, and cause a heart attack and thrombosis. And this is what statins can actually incidentally do. They can improve the calcification. They can reduce potentially the risk of that soft plaque from rupturing and causing major, massive problems.
It won't break. It's stable. It won't cause a heart attack or a stroke. Removing inflammation or reversing plaque causes more stable plaque and less or no soft plaque. The best goal is to have no plaque at all. But most of us develop plaque as we age into insulin resistance. When we do,
yeah, you don't get insulin resistant just with age, though. It's age as well as just crappy diet, not looking after yourself, eating the wrong things, ultra processed food, carbs, grains, all of these things. Smoking, of course, pollution. I mean, some of these things you can avoid, some of these things you can't avoid. So yes, it's not realistic to have zero plaque, but effectively zero plaque is what we are looking for. Though I've got lots of patients with a completely zero calcium score. I had a patient today, 67-year-old gentleman with zero CT calcium score, zero. Pretty damn good.
What to do?
What's he been doing? He's basically been keto for like 10 years.
Stabilize that plaque and keep it stable. So, what did I do to reverse my plaque? Remember when I said I came back from that first long run after finding out my plaque, and I decided to change a few things. I changed the way I ate. As I said, I went from low fat to low carb. I changed the way I exercise. I changed my mind on supplements. I changed the way I slept.
All really important factors for just general health, basically. It's not rocket science. Don't eat a ton of sugar, do some exercise, correct anything that needs correcting, and sleep. It's not rocket science. Health doesn't have to be that hard.
And yes, I even started medications. Some of these changes, like medications and supplements, were helpful, but far less important than lifestyle. That's been proven time and time and time again. Lifestyle is king.
It really is. It really is.
Most important change for most people is weight loss.
No, it's not. Weight loss is a proxy for generally improving health. Weight loss itself doesn't really do that much. If you're losing weight, outside of obviously bad things like cancer and so on, if you're intentionally losing weight, you are likely to, for the most part, be improving your health. But I've seen tons of people lose weight. They do things like Light and Easy, Jenny Craig, all these meal replacement shakes, all this kind of thing. They lose weight, but they don't get more healthy. Not specifically the CIMT, but other markers like insulin resistance, HbA1c, fasting glucose, fatty liver. These things don't often improve. They're metabolically often worse than when they started, even though they've actually lost weight. So no, I actually disagree with Dr. Ford here. Reversing plaque, weight loss is not key. Weight loss is simply a proxy.
At 5'10", I weighed about 157 pounds, so I didn't have much opportunity there.
Yeah, that's not a lot. What's 157 pounds? Like 70 kilos, maybe at 5'10"? I'm just over 70 kilos, and I am about 5'9". So now I've got some weight to lose, certainly, but probably about 2-3 kilos, nothing massive. But it depends on the measurement of muscle and so on. This is where BMI is not a very useful tool.
I did lose 5 to 10 pounds, and that did help.
Okay, that's quite a lot. When you're only like 170, what was it? Was it 170 pounds, 160 pounds? That's quite a lot to lose.
I also traded in marathon level distances for a lot more HIIT and resistance training.
Okay, I think the HIIT training over the marathons probably did very little to nothing in terms of benefit. Either one's perfectly fine. It doesn't really actually make that much difference. There's some evidence that HIIT training can be very useful, yes, but there's also a lot of evidence that just long form kind of low intensity training is also pretty much just as good. It's just with HIIT training you can kind of compress it a little bit better. Resistance training, though, this is probably the thing that actually did a big thing for him. Resistance training is so important. I say it so many times. Muscles are not just for vanity. If that's the one thing you can take away from this whole video, muscles are not just for vanity. They are really, really important. We all should be doing some weightlifting 3 to 4 times a week. Bodyweight exercises are perfectly fine. Myself, my wife and I, we do mostly calisthenics programs at home. We're doing, 30 kind of squats, 30 push-ups a day, as well as some other bits and pieces. You don't need huge amounts of exercise and muscle gain. You just need a basic level. It's just the vast majority of people do absolutely nothing.
Especially in the legs.
Yeah, incredibly important. Never skip leg day. This is known in the bodybuilding world, but most people just do not train their legs. They just sit there doing bicep curls all day, and that's pretty much about it. Yes, you're going to get big biceps, but the rest of your body is going to be stick thin, and you're going to have no muscle mass. Think of muscle like a really big sponge to just soak up all of that kind of metabolic badness. Basically, it doesn't mean give you a license to just eat shit and do bad things, but it gives you a big safety net. That's really the key thing with muscle.
Active, strong legs are the most effective internal safety valve against rising blood sugar.
That's absolutely right. Your glutes, your butt is so important, not just legs, but glutes as well. These are some of the biggest muscles actually in your body. It really does make a huge difference. I noticed a lot when I started really working out and built some muscle. Even when I went off the exercise, I was able to keep the weight off so much easier.
I started taking supplements. I started with vitamin D3.
Yep, can be useful, especially if you're not getting a lot of sunshine, of course. If you're not vitamin D deficient, vitamin D supplements are going to do probably nothing, but they're also not very expensive and very little harm.
1,000 international units.
Personally, I just prefer to take my shirt off and go sunbathing, and depending on who's around, possibly some nude sunbathing. I like my testosterone levels to go up, and there's some studies earlier on, I think the 20s, I think it was, where they exposed men to UV radiation through a UV lamp. They didn't do sunshine, but very close to sunshine. And they found that irradiating the testicles with UV light actually gave about a 10 times increase in testosterone level. Now, these people had low testosterone to start with, but isn't that just very interesting? I believe, off the top of my head, chest and back gave about a 2 to 3 times increase, whereas testicles gave a 10 times increase. Just saying, if you can, don't do it at the park.
And niacin, 2,000 milligrams a day.
Which I'm not sure how much niacin is going to do. Niacin is vitamin B3. So vitamin D3, of course, is different. Niacin is vitamin B3, B for Bravo. Often goes by many names. So niacin, nicotinamide, niacinamide, NMH, NMD, there's all sorts of names for vitamin B3. 2,000 milligrams, that is a big dose. That is a huge dose of vitamin B3. Why the heck was he taking so much? I have no idea. And I'm really surprised he did not get massive symptoms from that. Niacin, niacinamide, these are notorious for causing really bad flushing, like just redness and sweating and not feeling very well. Nicotinamide is much better tolerated. Again, I've got a link in my Amazon store in the episode description if you guys want to check out the one that I recommend to my patients. Interesting side note on this, not relevant to this particular story, but nicotinamide, vitamin B3, the one that I recommend, is extremely potent for improving erections and sexual function, including orgasms in both male and females. Can increase libido as well as a whole heap of other potential benefits. Of course, women aren't getting erections, but they can still improve from easier orgasms and more powerful orgasms, and also increase libido if that is what you are looking for. Men, it can be a pretty damn potent erectile modulator. So it's not like Viagra. It's not going to give you an erection, but when you do naturally get an erection, it's likely to be more powerful, stronger, last longer, etc. But that's because it improves blood flow. So improving blood flow, I don't think is going to have any direct effect on plaque, though it does reduce insulin resistance, which could have a secondary effect on plaque. Also improve nitric oxide production, all these other bits and pieces. So indirectly, I suppose it could potentially help, but 2,000 milligrams is a huge dose. I mean, 1,000 milligrams a day is a big dose. That's the limit that I would recommend, especially niacin. I wouldn't even go 500 milligrams of niacin. Are you likely to get flushing? By all means, try
Mostly
it.
because I had some HDL issues. I've updated that list to my current needs. And now I'm taking vitamin D3, 5,000 international units a day, K2, 4.
Very important. So vitamin K2, which incidentally you can't get from plants. You can only get from animal sources and mostly organ meats. So things like carnivore diet often are not that high in vitamin K2 because they're typically not eating organs. So actually supplementing vitamin K2 incredibly important. Vitamin K2 is important for stabilization and reversal, hopefully, of plaque.
Micrograms a day with an additional tablespoon of natto.
Okay, that could potentially help as well, though it's not my preference. I don't like plant materials particularly very much. I said I'd come back to boron. Now, this is where boron becomes important. Vitamin K2 needs adequate levels of vitamin D to actually work. Supplementing vitamin D, if you're already good in vitamin D, is not likely to be of any major benefit. But it also needs boron to actually work. Really interesting fact. And on things like a carnivore diet, very often boron is very much lacking. Now, you can't really do a blood test for boron, at least not in Australia, that I've found. You can do hair mineral tests. I'm not sure how accurate they really are. So it's hard to really check your boron levels. But these K2 and vitamin D3, that combination really actually needs boron to also work. Where do we get boron from? Mainly fruit. Of course, if you're doing a carnivore diet, you're not eating fruit. If you're doing a keto, you might be eating fruit. 1 apple a day is probably sufficient. It's going to give you 2, 3, possibly milligrams of boron, 1 milligram being the absolute minimum that we should be getting. But That's based on historical sources, historical data. We may not actually get that much boron anymore because of soil depletion. So this is a problem. So boron is something that I'd also recommend a lot of people think about taking. A lot of people find great benefit in boron.
L-citrulline, magnesium L3 and
I'm not sure the L-citrulline is going to really do much either, to be honest.
magnesium chloride.
Not sure why he's taking two magnesiums particularly. Again, magnesium could be useful, but I would argue why you're not just getting magnesium in your diet. And if you're struggling to get magnesium in your diet, maybe just change your diet around to get more magnesium into your body. Again, boron, really important for magnesium levels in your body as well.
Violet garlic.
Again, I'm not sure how much evidence really garlic has. Maybe some evidence it could be useful. Personally, garlic causes my thumbs to become very wildly inflamed and I get really bad arthritis from garlic. So I have a little bit of garlic every now and then on my eggs. I do like it a little bit there, but I'm not going to take garlic pills because it's going to cause me problems.
I'm also taking more natto.
Yes, you said that already.
Let me tell you where I am now. This is my latest CIMT from December 2023. This CIMT is from Cardio Risk. Cardio Risk has world-class CIMT quality processes. As you can see, in my left carotid artery, I still did not develop more significant plaque. It stayed mostly below 1.2 millimeters. On my right
But previously it was lower?
side, that plaque I had from the beginning is still 1.3 millimeters, and it's still stable or heterogeneous. Let's take a closer look at that obnoxious plaque. As you can see in the image, it's very white. That's calcium. It's mainly calcified. Again, it's stable. I was 66 years old when I did this test in December of 2023. My arterial age is now, drum roll please, my arteries are still back at the healthy level of 58 years old.
Not
And
bad.
I'm still way below the average for my age. Now, regarding labs, we talked about those early on. I've had low HDL for most of my life.
Which is a big problem. Low HDL is a big problem. It likely indicates metabolic dysfunction, insulin resistance, and generally unfavorable outcomes for cardiovascular disease, as well as a whole heap of other things as well. I'd wonder why he had such low HDL if he was exercising so much and eating a good diet. It's unusual. What if he just has like zero testosterone? Don't know.
Actually increased my HDL when I went low carb.
Yeah, not surprising. It very often does. It's a common misconception and things that's really hidden from us. Again, Nina Teicholz talks about it in her book, The Big Fat Surprise. Very, very good book. And basically, saturated fat, of course, we're told animal fat, saturated fat is bad for us, it's terrible for us, it's going to kill us. No, that is really not the case. Saturated fat also increases HDL, which is the quote unquote good cholesterol. It also improves the LDL subfractions, the LDL profile on the whole. So why are we told it's bad? That's another story.
I did that even though I was aging. And most of the time, people age and decrease their HDL. Now,
Okay. I mean, I'm not sure that is entirely true. Maybe I'll have to look that one up. He might be right. I'll have to look that one up. If it is, I've learned something, but I've not particularly seen that. So I'm not sure that is necessarily true.
is that important? Low HDL is a very strong warning sign of unhealthy carb metabolism.
Yeah. I mean, it basically indicates metabolic dysfunction, basically. Insulin resistance, it's a proxy, it's the buzzword. So everyone's talking about it. What they mean is metabolic dysfunction.
Meaning that I've probably had subpar carb metabolism even when I was much, much younger. In other words, probably bad genetics.
Maybe, or just something that you weren't aware of. A lot of people would like to blame everything on genetics. I'm not sure that's entirely true. It could be, maybe, but also I'd like to know things like testosterone and so on, and yeah, etc.
Those carbs out of my diet has helped my metabolism, as shown in lipid or cholesterol profiles and fractionation.
Yeah, so his LDL pattern is A, which is really fantastic. The peak size, bit weirdly low. I don't know. I mean, there must be some difference between peak size in America and Australia, the particle size. I'd have to double check that one because I'm used to levels of like 270. 265 is low and they're 224. So there must be a difference there. I'm going to have to look this one up. But on the whole, we can see it's all green. Most likely, this is a pretty good lipoprotein fractionation of LDL, which is a really important test. And anyone in Australia can get in touch with me. I can order an LDL subfraction for you. It costs around $150, $170 through Nutripath. And it's an incredibly good test to do. Really useful.
Now, what am I doing at this point? First and foremost, I keep my body fat down. I've had 2 DEXA scans. Here are the images. My body fat stays around 20%. That's equivalent to an 18-year-old, the average 18-year-old.
It's probably lower than I had at 18, to be fair. 18, I was a bit of a chunker. I've still got a way to go. DEXA scans are really useful for body composition and body fat. They're pretty damn good estimation, though they can be fooled. So it's really important with DEXA scans that you do the same protocol each time you do it. And then if you cheat, all you're really doing is cheating yourself.
Visceral fat stays around a half a pound to a pound. That's also very healthy for an older man like me.
It's very healthy for anyone, really.
And it's not incredibly easy either. But after decades of watching my body fat, it's not that difficult either. By the way, I have ice cream twice weekly. As you can see, my diet is usually, but not always, lightly to moderately ketotic.
Yep, same as me. I eat frozen yogurt. I wouldn't call it ice cream. Frozen yogurt with like blueberries, maybe some bananas, some strawberries, possibly some raspberries, though I'm not a huge fan because they're higher oxalates. Yeah, pretty much most nights, actually. And I still remain mostly ketotic as well. Whenever I check my ketones, which is rarely, because I just don't bother, I don't see the point, I'm always in ketosis.
And with the ice cream, I never had positive urinary ketones until recently. Recently, I went on a 5-pound water fast and really got very ketotic urine strips.
Urine strips are not very accurate for ketones. If you really want to know your ketones, just get a ketone meter. They're more expensive. Here in Australia, you can pick them up for about $50, combined glucose and ketone meters, but the strips are quite expensive. That's where the cost comes in. Glucose strips are much, much cheaper relatively. Ketone strips are quite expensive. If you really want to know your ketones, get the ketone strips, not the urinary strips. Get the actual blood ketone monitor. So much more useful. If you just want a rough ballpark, yeah, look, ketone sticks, urinary sticks are absolutely fine.
I've always known, or over the past couple of years, I've known that I'm ketotic because of breath ketones. I exhale about 10 parts per million acetone most days. Yes, acetone's finger polish removal.
Yeah, nail polish remover. Yeah, I mean, that looks like it's probably, what's that thing? Luma, something, I can't remember the name of it now. The thing that you breathe out into to supposedly show you when to eat carbs or not. Not sure how useful it truly is. But that looks like it's probably something along those lines.
That chemical. And yes, your body makes it when it's burning fat. Urinary ketones are,
which it does all the time, not just ketosis.
Far more challenging to see if, 1, you've been fat adapted for a long time, and 2, you remain mildly to moderately ketotic.
Yeah, usually urinary ketones you'll only see if you're really in quite deep ketosis. I just generally don't see the point in measuring ketones for 99% of people. It really doesn't add anything at all.
Both of those descriptions fit me. I've been managing my carbs at this point for over a decade. I also work out regularly and hard.
Yep, 3 to 4 times a week is generally a very, very good idea. I don't think you need to work out super hard. I do generally about 15 minutes a day. Not super huge, but I'm pounding it for those 15 minutes. I'm not just doing a few bicep curls and then sitting down and resting for 10 minutes,
To hit and rehit high intensity interval training. As you see on the screen, I'm not just jogging, I am sprinting uphill. I followed Sean Amara's uphill sprinting advice long before I'd ever heard of Sean Amara.
I mean, I'm not sure. It's a bit of a silly video, but yeah, fair enough. It's entertaining.
These uphill sprints are also aggressive for a 67-year-old man.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
I do multiple types of muscle training, especially in my legs. Strong, metabolically active leg muscles are our best safety valve against rising blood sugar.
Yeah, that's very true. Again, think of that muscle like a big, big sugar sponge. Muscles are a big sugar sponge.
And I do this work multiple times each week. It takes discipline. But whether it's diet or exercise, the hardest part is actually making that change and making the change stick.
It is. I think the most important thing here, I had a conversation with a patient today. We all know what to do. None of this is new to, I'm sure, most people. We all know what to do, but we just don't do it. Why? Why don't we do it? That's the key thing with all of this is the why. How can we get people to make those changes? I think the key thing is finding the why. Why? What motivates you? That I think you have to get. And it has to be, I think, an intrinsic motivation, not an extrinsic motivation, an intrinsic, something that's really important to you as an individual. Now, that could be money, it could be wealth, it could be power, whatever it is. I don't really care. Could be health, could be wealth, could be kids, family, whatever it is. Something that really actually motivates you for you. Intrinsic motivation. Anything else just doesn't really work. If you can find that, then you'll be healthy because you'll actually want to be healthy, genuinely.
So, if you're sitting there and thinking, everybody knows that you should get a stress test and then a stent and then just be done with it instead of all of this hill sprints and diet management.
It's certainly easier, isn't it? Unfortunately, a lot of people do think like that. They just think, well, medicine's going to be there to save me, so why the hell bother?
If you're thinking that, be aware that I wrote a whole book on why stress tests don't predict heart attacks and stents don't prevent them. The calcium score is more well-known, and it's harder to mess up than a CIMT. But calcium scores don't tell you everything. In fact, they don't tell you the most important thing. They don't tell you anything about soft plaque.
That's very true. Calcium scores only tell you hard plaque, though it's quite likely that the equivalent amount of hard plaque that you have, you also have soft plaque. Now, the problem with the calcium score is it doesn't give you that number. It gives you a risk. It doesn't give you the actual plaque. The only thing that can really tell you exactly how much plaque you have in your coronary arteries is an angiogram. CT angiogram also can pretty much do the same. CT calcium score is a very good tool, though, but it's not infallible. Just like a CIMT is also a very good tool, but not infallible. And a CIMT also gives you a risk score. It's a very good risk score, but it's still a risk score. It's not actually directly measuring plaque.
Also, a high calcium score can mean either unhealthy calcification or healthy calcification, so it has its limits.
It does. I mean, I've got patients with many thousands calcium scores. It's impossible to really interpret. It really is impossible to interpret. And it just becomes a point where there's just no point in doing more calcium scores because it's just not giving you any more information.
I do recommend it to find out if you have plaque for the first time.
Yeah, I think if you've got a 0 calcium score, you're very, very unlikely to have any plaque, though it can happen. It can happen. I did have one patient who, for some reason, the radiologist read the request wrong and they did a CT calcium score, but they also did a CT angiogram. For some reason, they misread the request. I only requested a CT calcium score, but they did the CT angio anyway. Now, this patient had a 0 calcium score, but they had a well over 90% blockage in one of their arteries. True story. Now, I can't share their details, of course, and show you their results, patient anonymity and confidentiality, but true story. 0 calcium score, yet over a 90% blockage. And they got in straight away. They didn't even have any symptoms, just came to me for a routine screening, just cardiovascular health check. I mean, thank God that radiologist read the request wrong and did the coronary angio, CT angio, because otherwise that patient could have just had a heart attack at any point, over a 90% blockage. Now, this probably still would have been fine for years. But isn't that just crazy? And just to say, it can happen. You can have a negative calcium score and still have plaque, but it's quite unlikely. That is probably a once in a lifetime thing that I'm going to see, hopefully once in a lifetime.
But even a score of 0 is no guarantee. There are plenty of people that have had heart attacks with the 0 calcium scores.
There you go. It does happen.
After watching this video, you may understand why. If not, we'll cover that in another video. Lastly, the new kid on the block, CT angiogram with AI, artificial intelligence. I'm a big fan. It can show both soft and calcified plaque with a lot of detail. However, it has some downsides.
Yeah, radiation, contrast, risk of anaphylaxis and allergy to the contrast. Some people have been known to have heart attacks after procedures like this. It's not without risk and costly. Here in Australia, it's about $1,000.
It's more expensive. It is invasive somewhat, and with the wrong interpretation, it can also put you through the process of getting an unnecessary stent or bypass. I chose CIMT because, despite its challenges, it's the only quick, non-invasive, inexpensive way to identify soft plaque. Again, soft plaque is the key.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you've got a super high risk patient, I'd still think about sending them for an angio. I had a patient recently, terrible diabetes, not looking after himself, very, very bad lifestyle. Basically, I just said to him, just point blank, I said, look, I'm going to be blunt with you. You are a walking heart attack. And I would be surprised if you're not having a heart attack right now. We did some testing. He wasn't, did some blood tests, ECG. There was no signs of a heart attack. Cardiac enzymes were all normal, but the risks remains very, very, very high. And it's only a matter of time before this patient has a heart attack. So I actually discussed all this with him, and we agreed to do a carotid Doppler scan, a CIMT score, and also a CT angio, as well as a lipid subfraction, to basically just give him the best chance of actually dealing with this problem before he actually has a heart attack. So there are some patients I would still send for a CT angio, but they are few and far between.
You're right if you think the lack of radiation is an advantage too. It is. The other ones all have radiation. But I don't think the radiation from a CT angiogram, or clearly a calcium score, is significant if you're dealing with cardiovascular disease risk.
Exactly. There's no point trying to reduce the radiation if you're just going to die anyway from a heart attack. Calcium scores give you almost 0 radiation anyway as well. It's extremely low. Angios are more, but calcium scores very, very low.
You plan to get a
I think it's akin to a DEXA scan, which is already extremely low anyway.
Angiogram with AI analysis at some point. As we said, it's expensive, time-consuming, requires radioactive dye. I just keep putting it off because the only reason I really need to do it, a CT angiogram, is to provide it to my viewers on YouTube.
Yeah, basically, if you've got a really good CIMT, you don't really need a CT angio. It's just pointless.
I obviously like you guys a lot, but CT angiogram's a headache. We've yet to talk that much about what caused all this. In short, I belong to those 52% of us over age 18 with prediabetes. And guess what? Within a couple more years, my insulin receptors continued to age into a state of full type 2 diabetes. Now, I took all the risk off the table. I'm not worried about it. Again, I took the risk off the table. Many people like Jason Fung, Eric Westman would say, I think they would say, I cured my diabetes. In other words, I don't eat carbs.
I'm confused here. Has he got prediabetes? Has he got diabetes? Has he got neither? I'm a little bit confused here. Just because you don't eat carbs doesn't mean you cure your diabetes. If your HbA1c is no longer pre-diabetic, if your blood tests are no longer pre-diabetic, if you don't have any symptoms of diabetes, you don't have any signs of diabetes, no end organ damage, anything like that, you're off medications for at least 5 years, yes, you can then say you've cured diabetes, but otherwise, no, you can't say that. But it can be cured, 100%. Type 2 diabetes can be cured in the vast, vast majority of people. But most doctors don't even know that.
Carbs to cause a problem. Now, I also told you early on that I was going to give you a confession. The next thing is going to create controversy. It already has. I've gotten hater comments from some of the most prominent content creators and viewers in this space. But be patient with me. Cutting carbs was not the very first thing I did. I didn't even know I had prediabetes for the first few weeks. The very first thing I did was to take a medication. And guess what type? It was a statin.
Of course it was. But why wouldn't you? Because most doctors are going to suggest this to you. The guidelines suggest this to you. Most people are going to tell you that you're stupid if you don't take a statin. Statins can be useful for some people. In this case, Dr. Ford Bremer, probably wasn't actually very high risk. Even though his CIMT was higher, it wasn't actually that high at all. So, and his blood pressure was up a little bit. Now, we don't know other risk factors, but he probably didn't really need the statin. And you guys should watch my other videos on statins and cholesterol, of course, that I've covered from other people as well with my commentary on. But I probably wouldn't have put him on a statin, but I would have worked aggressively with him to reduce those other risk factors down through exactly the approaches that he has done. And he's obviously shown the benefits here.
By the name of simvastatin. It was low dose. And I wasn't trying to beat down my LDL cholesterol. In fact, LDL cholesterol was very low.
Which is also potentially a problem. If you look at things like the ARIC study, it shows that low LDL cholesterol is also potentially an issue. Interestingly, though, the protection from statins mainly come in the anti-inflammatory and anti-thrombotic properties, which are not necessarily dose dependent. So even a low dose of statin can be helpful rather than a higher dose. Higher dose really just reduces cholesterol even more and potentially increases side effects as well.
About to click away. Just hear me out for a second. Yes, I know. Statins are associated with significant problems.
Yes, they are. Muscle cramps, weakness, potential cognitive impairment, possibility of increased risk of dementia, possibility of increased risk in certain cancers, lower hormone levels, low immune system. I mean, just, yeah, you name it. They can cause problems. You're also more likely to get type 2 diabetes than you are to prevent one non-fatal heart attack. Look at websites like the nnt.com for further information there and the studies and so on. But they can still be useful for some people, just the right individuals.
And yes, Big Pharma has made more than a ton of money.
It's $1 trillion a year industry. $1 trillion a year. Statin sales. Big business. Lot of incentive, a lot of inertia.
Statins. But here's the problem. It's mainly used at higher doses, and it's mostly used to beat down LDL cholesterol. Everybody beats up on statins, and they beat up on me for saying that I used them. So what is the...
It's very true, especially in the carnivore community. People are so blindly zealous against statins and medications in general that they are often putting themselves, I think, at harm by not listening to the advice, not having proper conversations with doctors like myself, perhaps with Dr. Ford, who actually understand the nuances of who might benefit from those medications. At the end of the day, you can basically be healthy or you can be on the statins. That's really what it boils down to. But you can't just kind of do something. You can't just kind of be keto. You can't just kind of be carnivore and just like, oh, I eat sausages, so I'm all good. No, that just doesn't work. You're going to get the problems with heart disease and so on.
Purpose of a statin? Is it like most people think, to decrease cholesterol? No, I don't use statins to lower cholesterol.
So is he on a statin still?
Why did I take it? The evidence is clear that low-dose statins can decrease cardiovascular inflammation. I only use low-dose statins myself or for my patients who choose statins. And I only recommend either
That's what basically the same as me. It's not necessarily dose dependent in terms of the benefit. So low dose statin is likely to give you the majority of the benefit with also less side effects and complications and risks.
statin or pitavastatin, the generics. I actually switched from simvastatin to pravastatin, and even now, I take a low-dose rosuvastatin, 5
I'm not a big fan of rosuvastatin, but fair enough.
milligrams, 2 or 3 times per week.
That is a low dose. That's a low dose.
Also, you don't have to take it every day.
Correct. You don't. I mean, I actually told 2 patients today, similar thing, why don't you just basically very, very high risk, cardiac, big calcium score, well over 1,000. And I suggested, they consider actually taking a statin. It's in the guidelines. Of course, I do have to follow guidelines and suggest these things to my patients. Whether or not I agree with them or not, I do have to suggest them. But I can also give my opinion. But I also said to them, look, maybe you just take it every couple of days, just a low dose. You'll get the benefits, but minimize the side effects. And I also said to another patient, at the end of the day, another patient, younger patient with type 2 diabetes, female patient, on and off keto, on and off low carb, generally just not really looking after themselves terribly well. They do well for a bit and then they go off it again. And there's reasons why that happens. But I said to them today, look, at some point, we have to kind of accept that you're not able to stick to the plan for whatever reason. And we'll keep working at that. But at some point, we also need to start addressing the risks. And we're just not doing that because every time you kind of go back to keto and then you go off it again. So you either stick with it or you go on the statin. Those are really the options. So we'll see what she says in 3 months' time after she's gone keto again. But the point there is they can be useful for people, but you have to be willing to commit. You have to be able to commit and to stick to it.
Especially the ones like rosuvastatin with a longer half-life. Now, this sometimes needs to be clarified, and I get comments like, here is a video from Dr. Brewer selling statins.
I know you mentioned statins might be useful for some people, and oh my God, people go crazy. The amount of accusations you get for being a pharma shill, getting sponsored by drug companies, all of these things, so ridiculous.
Selling statins. This video's not sponsored. The reality is statins can help, but
you could have got it sponsored by a CIMT provider.
Not central to plaque management.
No, they are minimal benefit, but still potentially some benefit.
They get way too much focus. They're simply an adjunct to lowering cardiovascular inflammation, not LDL. I also took baby aspirin. There is risk of bleeding, but it has been proven to decrease the risk of heart attacks.
Jury's out a little bit on that one. Current consensus is that it may not necessarily reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease, though there are other potential benefits like bowel cancer reduction and so on as well. So at the end of the day, it's unlikely to cause you any problems.
Not developing clots. Baby aspirin's also not for everybody. I only recommend it when there is evidence of plaque. Anyhow, let's move on. Multiple studies plus just plain old logic have shown multiple times prescription medications cannot come anywhere close to lifestyle. You cannot out-prescribe or even out-supplement a lifestyle.
You can't out-prescribe a bad diet. You just can't.
Most important part of lifestyle is eating habits. Supplements are far more popular than prescription medications. There are times in my practice when over half of my patients have chosen 0 medications. And not only am I okay with that, I'm very impressed with it. If you're wondering about LDL, recently, my LDL, I've got another story there. Recently, when I transitioned from low carb to a keto diet, my LDL increased from 55 to 110. I'd always had low LDL. And then the next month, up to 180. Additionally,
Yeah, mine's about double that. Just FYI.
Even though I'm still technically diabetic, my triglycerides, A1C, and insulin are as low as they can be. They're
Well, hemoglobin A1C could be a bit lower. Triglycerides are very low, possibly too low, actually. Fasting insulin 2.6, that's very low. Again, doesn't necessarily give the whole picture, but the picture here is generally one of very good metabolic health.
very, very low.
So all of these individual things here, these are pieces of the puzzle, and you can't just tell the puzzle from one piece. It's all putting it all together. The more pieces you can put together, the better kind of image, of course, you're going to produce.
And I have a healthy HDL cholesterol. So, if you've made it this far, thank you for your interest. I'm retired, sort of. Yes, I love travel and golf, but I love having an impact far more. People tell us all the time that we're saving lives every day with this information, and we believe them. There's no travel or leisure activity that can ever match saving a life.
Very, very true.
If you'd like more information, let me suggest this video.
Well, guys, that is the video. So I think a really, really useful video. I think a pretty good overview of CIMT scores, a bit about calcium scores, a bit about CT angiograms, a bit about statins and cholesterol. The title, how I reversed 20 years or how I cleaned out my arteries in 1 year. Yeah, look, I think that's a reasonable title. I don't think he's been misleading really in any way here. A couple of slight inaccuracies, a couple of things that I'm being pedantic on, but I do think it's important for us doctors as health influencers to be specific, to be particular in the wording that we use, to actually describe things accurately. On the whole, I think this was a really good video, and I'm glad that I've watched it. I've learned something a little bit today. It's always good to refresh knowledge on things like CAMT, calcium scores, CT angiograms, statins, and so on. Take home, really, I think for today's video was think about getting a CIMT or carotid artery Doppler scan. Here in Australia, they cost about $100 out of pocket. I'm more than happy to request these for any one of my patients. They are a non-invasive, very simple, very easy test to do with basically zero risks. CT calcium score, they cost about $100 hit out of pocket in Australia. Again, I'm more than happy to request these for really any of my patients. Generally, if you're 40 plus, I'll happily request them. 30 plus, you probably don't need them, but if you want them, I'll request them. Very low radiation dose, akin, I think, roughly to a DEXA scan off the top of my head, which is already a very low radiation risk. Lipid subfractions, also incredibly important. I don't rely on triglyceride and HDL ratios because they can be out, especially on things like a carnivore diet. But as you've seen it here, guys, obviously Dr. Bremer is talking about this in his great video, how he cleaned out his arteries, reduced his CAMT score, which is a very good indicator of carotid plaque, which is a very good indicator of coronary artery disease. And he basically did it through ketogenic diet, exercise, and weight training. Thank you guys for watching this video. I'll see you in the next episode.